There is a hardware store in Sugar Creek, Ohio, a small town in Tuscarawas County that sits squarely in the heart of one of the densest Amish communities in North America, where the shelves tell an unusual story. The tools there are built to be repaired, not replaced. The seed packets are open-pollinated, not proprietary. The goods on the back wall have not changed meaningfully in 40 years. And the people shopping there, when asked, will tell you something that takes a moment to register. They have no debt. Not most of them, not the successful ones, nearly all of them. That is not a spiritual boast, it is an outcome. It is what happens when a community spends 300 years quietly solving the same problem: how to live well without letting money run the household, and passes the solutions down not in books but in practice, season after season, generation after generation. The phrase cutting expenses carries with it a certain modern grimness. It implies sacrifice. It implies going without. It implies the joyless spreadsheet, the canceled subscription, the smaller portion. What the Amish figured out, and what makes their approach so worth understanding, is that most of the ways they spend less money are not felt as deprivation at all. They are simply a different arrangement of priorities, a different relationship with time and things and food and neighbors. And once you see that arrangement clearly, something shifts. Not dramatically, just quietly and permanently. The starting place is the pantry. In Amish households across Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, the 3 states with the largest communities, the pantry functions as a financial instrument. This is not a metaphor. It is an operational reality. When a family buys 200 pounds of oats in August, at harvest season pricing, and seals them in food-grade buckets in the cellar, they have effectively purchased 12 months of oatmeal at a per-serving cost of roughly 4 cents. The same product from a grocery store, purchased week by week in cardboard boxes, costs roughly 12 times that. The difference across a single year, for a single staple, is not trivial. Multiply it across flour, dried beans, cornmeal, sugar, and salt, all bought in bulk, all stored properly. And what the Amish call the full pantry begins to function less like a food storage system and more like a hedge against inflation. The pantry absorbs the price volatility of the market. The family never feels it. This practice has a history that runs deeper than most people would guess. When Amish settlers established communities in Lancaster County, formally organized in 1729, making it one of the oldest continuous Amish settlements in the world. They were doing so in a context where grocery stores did not exist, where supply chains stretched hundreds of miles over poor roads, and where a household without deep food reserves was a household one bad month away from real hardship. The full pantry was survival technology. It became tradition. Tradition became habit. And the habit, it turns out, is financially extraordinary even in a world where stores are open 24 hours a day. Closely connected to the pantry is the Amish approach to food production itself. Even among families who do not operate large farms, and many do not, particularly in the younger generation, kitchen gardens remain near universal. A well-maintained kitchen garden of even 400 square feet, which is roughly the footprint of a 2-car garage, can produce somewhere between $800 and $1,200 worth of vegetables at retail pricing across a growing season. The inputs, seeds, water, labor, cost a fraction of that. Most of it is labor, and most of that labor is pleasant enough that it would be difficult to classify as work in the modern sense of the term. The Amish do not think of the garden as a cost reduction strategy. They think of it as a kitchen that grows. The financial result is the same. Consider a woman named Anna Troyer, who lives in a farmhouse outside Millersburg, Ohio, and who tends a garden that her mother tended, and her mother's mother tended before that. When I asked her once whether she thought of the garden as saving money, she paused in the way that people do when a question has never quite occurred to them before. "We think of it as having what we need," she said. "The store is for what we cannot grow. That distinction, the store as supplement, not source, is the thing most households have quietly reversed. The store is where food comes from. The home is where it is stored. The Amish arrangement costs less, not because the produce is free, but because the margin between cost and retail disappears entirely. Preservation follows production. Where most kitchens today have a freezer that holds a few weeks of food, Amish households maintain canning traditions that compress an entire summer's abundance into winter-proof storage. Water bath canning for high-acid foods, tomatoes, pickles, jams, and pressure canning for everything else. Green beans, corn, meat, soups. An Amish woman who spends 3 weekends in July and August canning the garden's surplus is not doing a quaint, nostalgic thing. She is performing a financial transaction. She is converting peak season produce at its cheapest, most abundant point into shelf-stable food that will carry her family through February at a cost that no grocery store can match. The equipment needed is minimal. A pressure canner, a water bath canner, jars, lids. These are not expensive. The jars, crucially, are reused year after year. This is one of the places where the Amish logic runs most counter to the modern consumer logic. The Amish buy things that last specifically because replacing them costs money. A mason jar that costs $1 and lasts 25 years costs 4 cents a year. A plastic container that costs $2 and lasts 3 years costs 67 cents a year. The arithmetic is not complicated, but it requires a relationship with objects that the convenience economy has spent decades training people out of. And this gets to something that most people never think to examine: the Amish concept of what a purchase actually is. In a typical consumer household, a purchase is a transaction. You exchange money for something, you use it until it breaks or becomes inconvenient. You replace it. In an Amish household, a purchase is more like an investment. You buy something once, you maintain it, you repair it when it needs repairing, and you pass it down. An Amish kitchen may have a cast iron skillet that is 80 years old, not as an heirloom, as a skillet. One that cost someone $4 in 1944 and has not cost a penny since. The implication of this for household spending is significant. If you never replace a well-maintained tool, you never spend the money on a replacement. The Amish have a repair culture that is so deeply embedded it is nearly invisible from the inside. They do not think of it as a strategy for spending less, because it has always simply been what you do with things that still work. But from the outside, the effect is measurable. A family that maintains rather than replaces spends dramatically less on household goods over any 10-year period than one operating on the replacement cycle that modern retail is designed to encourage. There is a related practice that carries an even larger financial impact, and it is one that arrives quietly enough that most people miss its significance entirely. The Amish do not borrow money for things that decline in value. This is the line that tends to land differently depending on who hears it. For most people in the modern economy, the idea that you would buy a car, a sofa, a refrigerator, or a vacation entirely with money already in hand is either aspirational or simply impossible. Financing these purchases, paying them off over months or years while accruing interest, is so normalized it no longer registers as a choice. But consider what it costs. A $6,000 car purchased on a high-interest loan over 36 months at 20% APR costs closer to $8,000 by the time the loan is paid. The car itself has depreciated. The loan has not. The Amish cultural refusal to finance depreciating goods, rooted in Anabaptist principles of avoiding entanglement with creditors and codified in community practice across generations, means that every purchase is either made in full or not made at all. The discipline required to live this way is not trivial, but the savings, compounded across a lifetime, are extraordinary. Amish households statistically carry almost no consumer debt. The monthly cash flow that most households direct toward interest payments is, in an Amish home, simply still there. The community structure itself functions as a financial system, and this is perhaps the most counterintuitive insight the Amish way of life offers to an outsider. In most modern communities, each household operates as a self-contained economic unit. You buy your own tools, hire your own contractors, maintain your own equipment, and pay your own way through every contingency. The Amish have organized themselves differently, and the financial consequences are significant. Tools are borrowed and shared. Labor is exchanged without money changing hands. The neighbor helps you with the harvest. You help him with the barn. A family facing a medical expense or a fire or a crop failure does not navigate it alone. The community absorbs a portion of the impact. This is not charity in the modern sense. It is a distributed insurance system that has been operating effectively for centuries. There is a documented case in Geauga County, Ohio, where a family lost their barn to a lightning strike in early spring. The worst possible time, with planting season approaching and the livestock needing shelter. Within 10 days, the community had organized and executed a barn raising. The new structure was built in a single weekend by 240 volunteers. The cost to the family was the materials and the food for the workers. The labor, which would have cost tens of thousands of dollars on the open market, was free. Not because of charity, because the family had participated in the same system for years and would continue to do so. The financial protection this network provides is real, measurable, and available to no one outside it, which is its limitation. But the underlying logic is something any household can approximate. Relationships with neighbors and community members are a form of financial resilience that does not show up on a balance sheet until you need it, at which point its value becomes very clear very quickly. Even if you have never grown a single thing in your life, even if you live in an apartment, even if the word canning has never entered your awareness, there are specific things in this way of thinking that translate immediately and practically. The single most transferable insight is probably not any one practice. It is the underlying orientation, that the standard response to wanting something is to consider whether it can be made, grown, borrowed, repaired, or done without, and that money changes hands only after those alternatives have been genuinely considered. This is not deprivation. It is a reordering of sequence. Ask first, buy second, if at all. The Amish make their own cleaning products. This sounds small, and individually it is, but the scale adds up. A gallon of white vinegar costs less than $3 and performs the cleaning functions of multiple expensive specialty products. Castile soap, baking soda, and washing soda handle laundry and surface cleaning without the markup that branding adds to commercial products. An Amish household might spend $12 a year on cleaning supplies that a comparable modern household spends $200 on. The cleaning is equally effective. The products are, in several cases, less chemically aggressive. The difference is simply that the Amish have not been persuaded that complexity is the same thing as efficacy. They make their own bread. They render their own lard. They dry their own herbs. They sew and mend their own clothing. Not all of it, but enough that the clothing budget for a family of 6 in an Amish home looks nothing like the same budget in a modern home. These are not heroic acts of self-sufficiency. They are ordinary weekday activities, no more remarkable from the inside than doing laundry or making coffee. Their financial effect is significant, not because any one of them saves a great deal, but because they exist in a context where dozens of such practices layer on top of one another. The cumulative effect of this layering, buying in bulk, growing food, canning surplus, repairing tools, sharing labor, avoiding debt, making rather than buying, produces a household that runs at a fraction of the cost of its modern equivalent, without producing a fraction of the comfort. In many cases, Amish homes are deeply comfortable. The difference is not hardship, it is arrangement. None of these practices require moving to a farm. They do not require converting to a religious tradition or abandoning modern convenience. They require something more modest and more difficult at the same time. A willingness to ask whether the speed and ease of the modern consumer arrangement is actually producing the life you want, or whether it is simply producing a bill. The Amish have been asking that question, collectively, continuously, for 300 years, and arriving at the same answers, not because they were told to, but because the answers kept working. Every harvest, every winter, every generation of children who grew up watching the same practices and found them sensible enough to continue. The knowledge did not almost disappear. The Amish held it deliberately, in practice rather than in print, passing it from hand to hand through the ordinary routines of daily life. And now, sitting in a hardware store in Sugar Creek, with shelves full of things built to last and seeds that will give you more seeds, it is available to anyone who wants to look at it clearly. If you were to pick one practice from this video to begin this week, not as a lifestyle change, not as an ideology, just as an experiment, which would it be? The pantry? The kitchen garden? The repair instead of replace? Leave your answer in the comments. And if something in this conversation surprised you, there is more where it came from. The next video in this series is already waiting.